fact that Trevor Noah even exists, or his birth basically was a crime, hence the title, Born a Crime. Hello and welcome back. I'm Karen. Today I'm going to talk to you about Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This, like all my reviews, unless stated otherwise, is spoiler free, so if you haven't read this, you may stay here, and I promise not to spoil you. So, since this book is an autobiography, let me first tell you a few things about the author, Trevor Noah. So, I guess you probably know him. He's a rather famous comedian who now lives in the US, and he hosts a show called The Daily Show and also does some stand-up comedy on Netflix and other things. He was, however, not born in the US, but in South Africa, to be more exact, in Johannesburg. And the year he was born was in 1984. What is important to know about him, because that's basically what the book is about, is that his mother was a black woman from South Africa, and his father is a guy from the German-speaking part of Switzerland, so a white guy who moved to South Africa for I don't know what reason. However, so the point being that Trevor Noah is a mixed-race child. In South Africa, they call it colored. Anyway, so Trevor Noah grew up in South Africa as a mixed-race child, and that's basically what this book is about. And later, I think in 2011, he moved to the States, where he really got big as a comedian. Okay, so about this book. It's Trevor Noah's first and so far only book. It was published in 2016 by Random House in the US. And as I said, it's an autobiography that lasts basically from Trevor's early childhood up until his early 20s, I would say. So early childhood until young adult is the time span that this book entails. One thing that I found quite particular about this is that the chapters are rather short, and every chapter has a 1 or 2 page, like an intro. So a separate piece of text that is usually printed in bold, which kind of lays the historical background out for you. So he would go like, okay, so this was the situation in South Africa at that moment. And he would talk about this for a page or 2, just telling you the general background, the situation, and all of that jazz. And then he would get into one of his personal anecdotes. So like a snippet from his life and how it was affected by that particular situation he described in the beginning. And that I found extremely helpful, because I did learn about South African history in school, but I didn't really know that much. And these kind of blurbs were really, really helpful and also very interesting. And they've really helped me to learn quite a lot of new things about the history of South Africa. As you probably know, the history of South Africa is defined by, or maybe not defined by, but a large part of South African history was the so-called Apartheid regime, which was a political system that was basically an institutionalized form of racial segregation. So black and white people were segregated, they're all put into groups and then allowed or not allowed different things depending on their racial status. This regime lasted quite a few years. It went on from 1948 to 1994. And so a few decades actually. And Trevor Noah was born towards the end of the regime in 1984. So some 10 years before apartheid officially ended in 1994. So enough with the numbers now. Anyway, a little bit more about apartheid. Trevor Noah, in this book, he describes it as a police state and also a system of surveillance. So it was basically a way or a set of rules and regulations to keep black people under control, to keep them from mingling with white people and from doing things that they were forbidden. And that's basically the point of Trevor Noah's existence, is that any sexual acts between white people and black people were forbidden. So the fact that Trevor Noah even exists, or his birth basically, was a crime, hence the title Born a Crime. They had to come up with really weird ways of kind of hiding this fact. Then he always had to play in the backyard, for example. He couldn't play with the other black kids because he was the odd one out, and his parents and grandparents were constantly afraid that he would be taken away by the police. And yeah, so that's what happened in his early childhood because of the rules of apartheid. Now, all of these aspects to me were really, really interesting, and these are also the main aspects of the book. But other than that, it entails so much more. So it isn't just, you know, a history of South Africa or what it was like to be a mixed child in South Africa. It is all of that, but it's so much more. It's also just a general discussion of institutionalized racism then and also today. And it includes, as I said, a lot of examples of institutionalized racism, some of which we still see today. There are a few minor subjects on the side as well that are also really interesting. For example, domestic abuse is a topic, religion, language, and also the link between culture and language and politics and language. That, to me as a linguist, was especially interesting because apparently South Africa has 11 official languages, which is even more than Switzerland. I didn't think it was possible, but apparently it is, and I just really love this aspect. So it paints quite a wide picture of South Africa during the years when Trevor Noah grew up. Okay, so that was quite a lot of information about the actual book. Now let me just tell you what I actually thought about it. So first of all, I loved it. You might have already noticed from the way I talk. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and it really, really deserves that. It is a very, very personal and emotional kind of book, and that's what I like if I read a non-fiction. I don't read a lot of non-fictions, but if I do, I like for them to still be very personal, and, you know, I still expect the storytelling to be like it would be in fiction, and that really was it. So Trevor Noah is quite a talented storyteller. He does a really, really good job at informing you about historical facts by using his personal stories and then like weaving them together, and it worked really, really well for me. And also, this is a book that I really learned a lot, and I think a lot of people will. Probably the strongest feature of this book is Trevor Noah's own voice. I mean, he's a comedian, he's used to public speaking, he's used to telling stories, and his unique character and his unique voice really, really comes through in this book. You really feel like you're getting to know him, you feel like he's telling you personally, he's telling his story to you in particular, and that is a feeling that not so many authors kind of ignite in me, especially not in non-fiction. I feel like often it's more like, can feel a little bit like a textbook where you get some information and you have to read about it, and it's rather boring in my opinion. And this is quite the opposite really. It's extremely engaging and interesting and personal. Other than that, I also have to say that the writing in this book is excellent. Noah apparently knows how to handle language. That's actually a part of the story, is how he learns lots of languages and then talks to people in their own language and how it affects his relationship with them. And I think he does that with the reader too, by just using a kind of language that makes his story very accessible and lets his like character shine through. And he manages to address some really serious topics with an occasional pun, and with the still a little spark of humor, even though it's not actually a humorous topic at all. Let me just read you the very first sentence. The genius of apartheid was convincing people who were the overwhelming majority to turn on each other. Apartheid is what it was. It's just so... These are the perfect words to describe apartheid. You could have done it any better. And this is the kind of style that he uses in the entire book. He really knows his words, knows how to handle them, and how to use them to tell a story while also including historical information. And I loved it. The only thing, or like the only negative thing I would say about this is that for me it ends a little too soon. As I said, it ends with Trevor's early 20s when he's slowly starting to get into the entertainment business, but I personally would have loved more about that, although I have to admit it probably would have been an entire book on its own. And another thing that I would have liked to see more of is the story of his mom, because his mom is the actual hero in this story. Seriously, she's such an amazing woman. I have so much respect for her just reading about her, and when you read it, you also get to feel the kind of respect that Trevor has for his mother, because she had to raise him under these appalling and impossible circumstances, and she did such a good job, and she kept being optimistic, she kept striving for the best, and she's probably the only reason why, or the main reason why Trevor Noah made it too, because she is the one who taught him to always keep fighting, to not just accept a set of rules because it's there. There's always a way to do something with it and to move forward. And that's what she does during the entire book, even though she herself ends up in one or another terrible situations. But she never ever gives up. She never pities herself. She's just amazing. I fell in love with her, and I would like to see and hear more about her. All right, that's all I have to say about this book, really. So, as I said, I tend not to read a lot of non-fiction, but this is actually the book that helped me get out of a reading slump. I had a terrible slump before I started reading it. I didn't feel like anything. I picked up several fantasies, I picked up YA, and just nothing really grabbed my interest. And then my boyfriend was like, oh, why don't you just read this? Because he gave it to me a few months ago. And I said, yeah, actually, why not? And I read the first sentence, which I read out before, and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds good. And I really wasn't disappointed. I would recommend this book to anyone, no matter if you know anything about South Africa or even care. You should, by the way, but I think this book is probably for almost everyone, and it's absolutely worth reading. Alright, so these were my opinions and thoughts on Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.